All right, we'll call this general committee meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here this day. We start our meetings with the following land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are in the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. We'll now take 30 seconds to reflect. We're going to have our national anthem later this evening at 6 p.m. for City Council. The Council for the City of Peterborough recognizes the principles contained in our Constitution and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And before we move on, I'm going to pass it over to Mayor Leal for some comments. Mayor Leal?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the outstanding hard work and dedication shown by so many in response to last week's ice storm. This truly was a devastating storm. According to Hydro One, this was the worst weather and event they've seen in terms of damage to the electrical grid in the province in the last 2 decades. Locally, this storm was worse than damage from the derecho, and in some ways it rivaled the impact of the flood of 2004. Tens of thousands of residents went without power for days, and the damage was seen across the entire city, from residential neighborhoods to main streets to our parks and trails. I'm incredibly proud and grateful for the Team Peterborough response to this emergency situation. I want to begin by thanking Jody DeNoble and her small but mighty emergency and risk management team, who coordinated the city's entire emergency response. Thanks to Sarah McDougall-Perrin for stepping up to help this team in a time of need. Thanks to CEO Jasbir Reyna and all our commissioners for their 24/7 leadership. Thanks to Casey Babcock and our Public Works team, who immediately jumped into the fray to clear our streets and ensure that Hydro One could assess the areas they needed to restore power. Thanks to Chief Netzinger of the Peterborough Fire Services, Chief Betts of the Peterborough Police Service, Chief Broomfield and the Peterborough County City Paramedics for continuing to provide outstanding emergency services during a time of crisis. Thanks to Barry Wakeford, the transit team, for coordinating warming buses for those without power, providing shuttle service to the warming centers, and getting our routes back on track. To Carrie Ruska and the IT services team for maintaining our networks when they were needed for a critical response. Thanks to Rob McCauley and the Recreation and Park Services team for running the warming centers and surveying the damage in our parks and trails. I want to also thank Brendan Wedley and the communications team for ensuring that residents were kept informed of the situation, the city's response, and available resources. Thanks to Rebecca Morgan Quinn and the social services team for temporarily moving their office to City Hall and continue to provide crucial support to residents during a very difficult time. Thanks to Lauren Daynard and the environmental services team for their hard work to ensure the wastewater treatment operations continued to meet the needs of our community. Thanks to Chris Allen and the procurement team who helped the city quickly acquire the resources we needed to respond to the storm. Thanks to Jen McFarland and the people and cultural team for supporting all of our employees through very challenging circumstances. Thanks to Jillian Barnes and the facilities and property management team for keeping the city facilities going, and Dylan Middleton and the municipal law enforcement services for performing around-the-clock security checks on city buildings. Thanks to Vet Polinsky and our financial services team for keeping track of the financial impact of the storm. Thanks to Sharon Hayton and Service Peterborough team, John Kennedy and the clerk's office, and all our frontline staff across the city for answering questions and helping people with whatever they needed. And my sincere apologies if I have missed anyone. I'm grateful to every staff member for their work on the storm response or for continuing the work despite the storm. I want to thank my colleagues on Peterborough City Council for their work to support their constituents through this challenging time. Thanks to Warden Bonnie Clark and the county's emergency response staff for working collaboratively for the benefit of our whole region. I want to thank my mayor friends, Adrian Foster of Clarington and Neil Ellis of Belleville, for dispatching crews to Peterborough to assist. I'd also like to sincerely thank, the Government of Ontario for their support. I want to thank MPP Dave Smith, Premier Doug Ford for personally calling me on Monday, Minister Rob Flack for his words of support, Minister Jill Dunlop for visiting Peterborough last Monday, and the hardworking staff of Emergency Management Ontario who supported us since the state of emergency began last Sunday. Thanks to the Salvation Army for providing snacks and meals to people visiting the warming centers, to Enbridge Gas for providing hot meals for residents, and Kawartha Food Share for coordinating the distribution of food packages to our residents in need. Thanks to OSARVA, Team Rubicon, and all those who volunteered to help. Thanks to our local media for continuing to share important information during difficult circumstances. On behalf of Council and the residents of Peterborough, I want to express sincere gratitude to Hydro One, all of its workers and the contractors, and others who came to Peterborough and worked through challenging weather to restore power to thousands of homes as businesses as quickly as they could. And lastly, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the citizens of Peterborough for checking on and helping their neighbors and for their patience, kindness, and resilience in the face of very difficult circumstances.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayor Leal. Well said. And on behalf of Council, Mayor Leal, we want to thank you as well. Thank you, Mayor Leal, for your leadership over the past 7 days during this emergency, your hard work 24/7, your strong communication, and I know you reached out to councillors many times to see if there's anything you can do. So thank you for the leadership you've shown, and the citizens and my colleagues appreciate your worship. So thank you.
Thank you much, Chair Beamer, for those kind words.
Right, adoption of minutes from February 18th and February 24th, 2025, moved by Councillor Degay. Any comments or questions, errors, or omissions? We'll take a vote and e-scribe. And that is carried. Mr. Clerk, any disclosure of pecuniary interest this evening?
Mr. Chair, I see none at this time.
All right, we have one item coming out of closed session this evening, governance. Whereas there exist vacancies on the board of directors of City of Peterborough Holdings Inc., COFI, and of its subsidiaries requiring appointments, now therefore be it resolved, 1, that the following individuals be appointed as directors to the board of COFI and of its subsidiaries. A, Mark Roger, Chair. B, Daniel J. Gormley, and C, Paul Kwasnick, and 2, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute amendments to the COFI shareholder direction and unanimous shareholder declaration as amended to July 30th, 2012, on terms considered advisable by the mayor in consultation with the city's chief administrative officer and in forms acceptable to the city's solicitor to ensure interim compositions of the board of directors of COFI and of its subsidiaries that are composed of members with the requisite industry, financial, and legal expertise. Moved by Councillor Baldwin. Comments or questions? We'll take a vote. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. All right, we'll move to our consent agenda. Committee members, let me know if you'd like to speak to any of the following items this evening. 14A, budget amendment and award for switchgear replacement at Del Prairie Park. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Seeing none. 14B, appointments to advisory committees. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Councillor Royal. 14C, 2025 community project and investment grants. Anyone wishing to speak to that? Seeing none. All right, so up for consent this evening, 14A and 14C, moved by Councillor Vassiliadis. We'll take a vote. And that is carried. All right, we do have one public meeting under the Planning Act, so I'll pass it over to the Chair of Planning, Councillor Purnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So tonight we do have just the one item, and it is a zoning bylaw amendment and community improvement plan to end exclusionary zoning, report IPGPL 25-013. And we will start off with a presentation by our policy and research planner, Megan Peck. Welcome to the podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, members of General Committee. My name is Megan Peck, and I'm a policy and research planner working under the direction of Carolyn Kimball, Manager of Policy Planning, and Brad Appleby, Director of Planning Development and Urban Design. I am pleased to introduce a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment and new community improvement plan to facilitate the end to exclusionary zoning practices in the city of Peterborough and to incentivize missing middle housing. The purpose of this report is threefold. First, the city is responding to directions from both the federal and provincial governments that call for an end to exclusionary zoning practices by amending the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw to permit up to 4 residential units on a lot as of right in the R1 and R2 residential districts. This zoning bylaw amendment also provides an opportunity for housekeeping amendments to update the ARU regulations to align with provincial changes. Second, this report recommends establishing a community improvement project area by bylaw to facilitate the creation of a new community improvement plan, hereinafter referred to as a CIP. Lastly, staff recommend adopting a new missing middle CIP to incentivize the creation of missing middle housing, in keeping with the city's commitment under the Housing Accelerator Fund application. The recommendations and intended outcomes of this report are underpinned by the results of the city's 2024 Housing Needs Assessment prepared by Dillon Consulting. Shifting household demographics and evolving market preferences have illustrated a gap between the city's existing housing stock and current housing needs across the city. The results of the Housing Need Assessment highlights this discrepancy. Presently, single detached dwellings with 3 or more bedrooms dominate the market, with despite 68% of households being comprised of 1 or 2 people. This demographic shift underlines the growing need for smaller and more accessible housing options that cater to singles, seniors, and smaller households, demographics that are currently underserved by Peterborough's existing housing stock. Housing affordability trends are also shifting, and housing costs are becoming more expensive for renters and homeowners and continues to outpace income growth. The results of this assessment calls for a more diverse housing stock with more affordable housing options that meet the needs of current and future residents. The results of the Housing Needs Assessment align with the widespread phenomenon in the provision of housing across Ontario, being a lack of housing types such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, row houses, and townhouses that provide a middle ground between single detached dwellings and larger apartment buildings. This pattern of development largely emerged from an overly prescriptive density or use-based zoning regulations, which in part has been linked to creating neighborhoods that lack a diversity of housing forms, particularly in established residential neighborhoods. This practice is often referred to as exclusionary zoning. Therefore, there's an identified gap within the city's housing market known as missing middle housing, which refers to the lack of low and mid-rise multi-unit buildings that bridge the spectrum between single detached dwellings and larger apartment buildings. In the city of Peterborough, some of the city's most cherished neighborhoods emerged in an era that predates exclusionary zoning. During this time, 2, 3, and 4-unit buildings were more commonplace, contributing to a more diverse housing stock. These buildings are similar in size and scale to single detached dwellings and can blend seamlessly within the established residential streets and blocks on pre-serviced land, making better use of existing community services, facilities, and transportation infrastructure. Infill development of missing middle housing can also support more affordable housing options by using cost efficiencies such as building on pre-serviced land and making better use of existing community services. All 3 levels of government support the elimination of exclusionary zoning practices. At the federal level, the call to end exclusionary zoning was reflected in the government's updated application requirements for the second half of the Housing Accelerator Fund. These revisions introduce new conditions mandating that municipalities commit to allowing up to 4 units on a lot as of right. At the provincial level, the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force recommended that municipalities limit exclusionary zoning and permit multiple units as of right on residential lots. Furthermore, in 2022, through Bill 23, the provincial government changed planning legislation under the Planning Act to permit up to 2 additional residential units on a lot as of right on eligible properties in support of multi-unit building configurations within established residential neighborhoods. At the municipal level, in January 2024, the Mayor's Task Force for Housing Creation recommended implementing as of right residential zoning to promote missing middle housing by April 2025. And to financially incentivize multi-unit residential developments, particularly affordable housing options. The proposed zoning bylaw amendments and CIP bylaws support both provincial and municipal policy objectives. These initiatives align with housing policies in the provincial policy statement and within the city's official plan by promoting infill development and encouraging a diverse range of housing options within developed and serviced areas of the city. To facilitate the creation of a new CIP program, and as required by the Planning Act, the city's official plan contains enabling language and policies regarding the use of CIPs and the establishment of a community improvement project area. Policies in the official plan support the use of CIPs to promote intensification, redevelopment, and to enhance the housing supply in strategic areas. These initiatives will help the city meet its housing pledge and support key initiatives under the city's strategic plan. It is important to note that most residential lots in the city of Peterborough are permitted to have up to 3 residential units as of right through the use of additional residential units, hereinafter referred to as ARUs. Therefore, the proposal to permit up to 4 residential units on a lot is considered gentle intensification and would permit one additional dwelling unit, one net additional dwelling unit contained within a single building. While the provincial introduction of ARUs have improved infill development across the city, the provincial legislation has some limitations. First, as I mentioned, the provincial ARU legislation permits a maximum of 3 units on a lot, inclusive of the primary dwelling unit, which does not expand the overall housing supply as effectively as a 4-unit building. Second, provincial legislation sets out layout constraints for ARUs, including limits to unit size and unit compositions. For example, ARUs must be smaller than the primary dwelling unit and are limited to a maximum of 2 bedrooms, which limits the diversity of unit compositions. Third, legislation requirements restricts ARUs to eligible primary dwelling units being a single detached, semi-detached, or row dwelling. In comparison, eliminating exclusionary zoning could permit the conversion of a duplex or triplex into a 3 or 4 unit building, increasing the flexibility of infill development forms. Lastly, provincial legislation requires ARUs to be subordinate to and situated on the same lot as an eligible primary dwelling unit. As a result, ARUs are typically better suited for rental tenure, with single entities owning all units on the lot. In contrast, missing middle housing forms offer greater tenure flexibility by allowing either rental or ownership models. To facilitate more affordable home ownership, properties can be divided into individual condominium units and share common elements for individual unit ownership. These limitations to ARUs illustrate an important gap in the provision of housing options across the province and call for an end to exclusionary zoning to support the development of missing middle housing. To eliminate exclusionary zoning practices, a zoning bylaw amendment is required. This amendment also provides an opportunity for necessary housekeeping changes. In November of last year, the province amended the provincial ARU policies to improve interpretation and relax the maximum lot coverage requirements for lots eligible for ARUs. These changes have been integrated into the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. To eliminate exclusionary zoning, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment will increase the maximum number of dwelling units permitted on a lot in the R1 and R2 districts from 1 and 2 units respectively to 4. These amendments are limited to the standard R1 and R2 zoning districts, as all other residential districts are not considered exclusionary, as they already permit 4 or more dwelling units on a lot as of right. Lots with multiple zoning districts will also be eligible for up to 4 units on a lot as of right, following the regulations of any one of the permitted districts. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment also introduces building types under the district's permitted use sections, clarifying the permitted building form and introducing purpose-built missing middle housing typologies such as 3-unit and 4-unit dwellings. Given the increase in maximum lot coverage for properties eligible for ARUs, the lot coverage for single detached, 2-unit dwellings, 3-unit dwellings, and 4-unit dwellings are also recommended to be increased to 45 across all residential districts to ensure that these purpose-built missing middle housing forms remain desirable and comparable to ARU development. Notwithstanding the change to maximum lot coverage, regulations within the residential zone districts have been intentionally maintained. This approach allows for a managed integration that will provide immediate access to missing middle housing on eligible lots, whereby more comprehensive changes to the zoning regulations can be reviewed through the city's community planning permit system project, which has recently been expanded citywide. While ending exclusionary zoning is an important first step, this alone is not anticipated to increase the creation of missing middle housing. This is partly due to the financial challenges associated with developing missing middle housing and the limited financial incentives available to support these types of developments. Through Bill 108, ARUs were exempt from development charges, parkland dedication, and community benefit contributions to lower development costs and promote intensification. Exempting ARUs from development charges can provide landowners with a sizable financial incentive. Therefore, under the present model, owners may be incentivized to tailor a building start to meet ARU requirements compared to other missing middle housing forms that are currently not DC exempt. Therefore, introducing financial incentives for missing middle housing can help overcome this cost disparity, making it more financially viable a housing option. Under the Development Charge Act, the city cannot exempt desirable types of development, such as missing middle housing, from development charges without first amending our DC bylaw. This process can be complex and can also effectively shift the development charge repayment to the taxpayer. To avoid this, a municipality may use a CIP as permitted under Section 28 of the Planning Act to offer certain development incentives within a defined project area without contravening the bonus provisions under the Municipal Act. Therefore, the city recommends implementing a new CIP aimed at providing financial incentives to missing middle housing projects. To do so, the Planning Act gives municipalities the authority to define a community improvement project area by passing an enabling bylaw for any environmental, social, or community economic development reason. Staff recommend adopting a citywide and community improvement project area to facilitate the creation of a new CIP called the Missing Middle Community Improvement Plan. The project area takes on a neighborhood-wide approach to end exclusionary zoning and to permit a greater variety of building types through infill development. The Missing Middle CIP will be funded by the city's successful Housing Accelerator Fund application, meaning the plan does not require the allocation of municipal tax dollars or capital funds. The proposed CIP has an estimated annual budget of $1 million. Once the annual funds are allocated, the program under the plan will close for that intake year and reopen in the following year if funding is secured through the half contribution agreement. It is anticipated that the CIP will end once all half funding installments are complete unless council decides to dedicate additional capital funding. Presently, only one program is proposed under the CIP, being the Development Charge Rebate Program, with 2 forthcoming incentives planned for implementation this fall. The purpose of the Development Charge Rebate Program is to provide upfront financial assistance for the creation of a second, third, or fourth unit on a lot by reimbursing the otherwise payable citywide uniform development charge fee in accordance with the city's development charge bylaw. The Missing Middle CIP contains general eligibility requirements for all programs under the plan, as well as program-specific requirements. To be eligible under this plan, a net increase in dwelling units is required for the creation of a second, third, or fourth unit on a lot. Eligible lots must also be serviced by both municipal water and sewer infrastructure and be designated residential or downtown neighborhood on Schedule B or C of the city's official plan. Furthermore, the proposed development must meet the definition of missing middle housing to be considered an eligible building type for conversion if applicable. The per unit grant funding available is equivalent to the citywide uniform charge for residential C units as defined by the city's DC bylaw, which is approximately $44,000 in 2025. This CIP also establishes a total maximum incentive for all programs under the plan equal to 3 times the residential C citywide uniform charge. Any additional fees beyond the available funding, including area-specific charges or education development charges, are not eligible for reimbursement under this program. The day-to-day administration of the CIP is intended to be coordinated by the city's planning division, facilitating application intake and coordinating the necessary grant agreements with the city's legal team. The CIP's proposed approval authority is suggested in accordance with the city's existing exempt expenditures authorities under the existing procurement bylaw. In this case, on eligible funding amounts, this would necessitate funding approval by the Commissioner of Infrastructure and Growth Management or the city's treasurer or CAO. Notice of the proposed CIP bylaws and zoning bylaw amendment were circulated in accordance with the requirements under Section 17 and 34 of the Planning Act. Notice of these applications were published in the Peterborough Examiner and on the city's website. Staff have not received any agency or public comments in opposition of these files. Staff did receive a letter this morning from Richard Taylor requesting clarification about the zoning bylaw amendment to permit up to 4 units on a lot as of right, and its impact on lots with multiple zoning districts, which I do believe I addressed in this presentation. The proposed amendments to the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw are a critical first step in ending exclusionary zoning. Supporting these amendments will also ensure ARU regulations remain up to date and in alignment with provincial legislation. There are little to no direct financial or budgetary impacts, particularly since the CIP program will be funded by the Housing Accelerator Fund and does not require continued recurring capital funding within the city's budget. Supporting these recommendations will mark a critical milestone in achieving the Housing Accelerator Fund program targets and will reduce development barriers facing missing middle housing to incentivize the creation of a more diverse housing stock with a greater range of housing affordability and tenure options to meet the needs of current and future residents. I thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Peck. We have 2 councillors who have questions for you at this moment. Councillor Burke, you're first, and then Councillor Riel. Councillor Burke, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Parnell. And through you to Ms. Peck. Megan, thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate it. I have a lot of questions, so like brief answers are fine, and I can ask you for more of a follow-up if that's okay. My first point or question would be about the wording of the motion, where it is in the part B where it says council designate lands, and then the page that it referenced, it feels like it's citywide. Do you think there's a need for a more defined clarification that it's citywide neighborhoods with those specific designations?
Through the chair, so the Planning Act allows us to establish a community improvement project area for smaller subsets of the city, expanded all the way to a citywide. We specifically decided that a citywide is more applicable here because it reduces any instances of having to amend the bylaw if designations change, or for instance, a special policy area boundary changes. So it's more of a to ensure that it remains in effect as
Okay.
changes are made.
Thank you. And through the chair, I just had a question about what measures are in place with this plan to prevent developers from exploiting these changes without delivering meaningful affordability or accessibility.
Through the chair, I guess there's no requirement that that developer would provide affordable units, but I will say that this CIP program can be stacked with other incentives. So it can be combined with the affordability CIP, affordable housing CIP, which would increase an incentive to provide missing middle housing with also a affordability component as well.
So through the chair, I guess I'm wondering if staff, when they workshopped through this, looked into some measures they could take to prevent exploitation of this. That would be my first question. And then on page 33 of, sorry, on page 23 of the report, 20 semicolon 20F, it talks about affordable housing as defined. What is that definition of affordability? Is it 80% of market rent?
Ms. Peck?
Through the chair, do you mind clarifying what page of the report that was on?
Yes, it's on page 23 and it's subsection 20F. Reference to the development charge rebate program. Page 67 of our agenda, but it's page 23 of the missing middle CIP.
Oh, I see. Yes. Through the chair, thank you for the page number there and the clarification. I appreciate that. So what you're seeing there is an excerpt from the development charges, the DC bylaw, which means that, and what this is saying, that buildings that are deemed affordable through provincial standards are exempt from development charges. So this would be this is affordable as defined by the DC bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is that will the new zoning allow for housing co-ops, land trusts, and other non-market options and allow for those things and limit the red tape?
Through the chair, so in this case, it will reduce red tape because it's provided as of right. So it will limit any Planning Act applications that would have to seek relief to go above and beyond the minimum, the maximum permitted units, which in the R1 and R2 is 1 and 2 units respectively. And then in terms of nonprofit housing accommodation, what is a great advantage of missing middle housing is that it has more tenure potential, or it's better suited to different tenure types. So currently ARUs are better suited for a rental tenure, whereas the missing middle, the way that the legislation is structured, or the bylaw is structured, I should say, it permits condominium units and different types of tenure ownership. So it will provide a greater ability for a more attainable ownership unit as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rail, please.
To the chair, to Ms. Peck, thank you very much for being here, Megan. Couple of questions. I don't see anything in here about safeguarding the distinct characteristics of neighborhoods. And certainly there are some unique neighborhoods in the city of Peterborough, and certainly I'm not against the ending of extortionary zoning, but I mean, you start massing something on some of the lots, let's say in the south end with the pretty planned bungalows, something you can get unsightly, the size of it, if someone used to build. So is there anything in here to safeguard the distinct characteristics of neighborhoods?
Peck, please.
Thank you through the chair. Yeah, so the way we framed the bylaw right now is we haven't proposed to change any of the zoning regulations. So we're increasing the number of permitted units, but zoning regulations such as maximum building heights and setbacks have not been altered. And in doing so, the form of buildings that are permitted on a lot aren't changing. So the shell of the building maximum build out would remain the same. It's more how the building is being configured on the inside. So that will help to ensure that these missing middle are compatible in scale and form to our existing residential neighborhoods. And then through our community permit project, community planning permit project, we can then go in and revise any regulations at a later date if we're finding that the uptake of missing middle housing is not occurring.
Through the chair to Ms. Peck. Megan, I've asked this question before about a disclosure that should be here when people avail themselves to doing this, that down the way impact might come along and saying now you have your R1, but now you've increased from R2 to R3, R4. Is there going to be a disclosure at the bottom of a building permit that this could have an impact on your assessment rate? Is that something that staff has thought about? Because I don't have a crystal ball, but if this comes to fruition, I can see some of us councillors getting a call, and when impact reassesses, which they will, why was I R1 and now I'm being assessed R3 and my assessment rate has just gone up? So is that something that staff's looking at, putting in a kind of a caution? I'm not saying is to discourage somebody from doing this, just I think there should be a cautionary thing that this could happen.
So through the chair, in this case, residential zoning districts or permitted zoning does have an impacted MPAC property assessments. However, just to be clear, a property currently zoned R1 or R2 wouldn't be changed. That R1 and R2 zoning districts will remain in effect, and the build out on the property will remain the same. However, it's just the unit compositions. So it's something that we can explore with the building division to put in kind of a disclaimer at the building permit stage, and we can also connect with MPAC to see kind of the impacts and how they do their calculations in terms of the impact on property assessments.
Much.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rial. Councillor Chica, please.
Thank you very much through you, Chair Parnell, to Megan. Thank you so much for the presentation. And, you know, more than anything, I as one of the co-liaisons to this IPG portfolio, to thank Commissioner Nelson and in particular Director Appleby for the time and the effort and the communication that's been involved in communicating what the outcome of the mayor's task force to ultimately culminate to this important proposal for a new bylaw. It's exciting because it explains how our important housing accelerator funding is going to be applied effectively to build more homes and to meet our housing needs, our diverse housing needs in the city. The fact that this targets a livable, accessible, and climate conscious city is also really exciting. And we have another presentation today that shows that alignment. So thank you so much. I'm excited about this. I have one question as I was reading through the details under eligible building types. I was wondering if any thought was given, or perhaps this would come later, about repurposed buildings. So retrofitting, repurposing existing multi-unit structures that may or may not have been residential before to be part of an incentive, to be part of additional residential units. For example, if a school is purchased by a developer and it could be converted and retrofitted, there are some additional residential units, and wondering if that could be included in this, or is this something that might come later? Thank you very much, Megan.
Ms. Peck, please.
Through the chair. So we have presently, the way it's drafted is that it is restricted to developments that are designated residential downtown neighborhood. And the reason being is that we do have a central area CIP that can be used to incentivize other forms of development. And our focus was truly intensification within our established residential neighborhoods. That being said, there's the language of the CIP has enabled us to, reassess and monitor the uptake, and we can change the program or adapt the program as we see fit. So I think that there's a potential, and we do have 2 other programs under the plan coming forward in the fall, and the eligibility criteria of those have not been set yet. So it's something that we could explore possibly through those programs as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. Megan, thank you for your outline of a very important and timely report. I have a couple of questions. Number one, are all properties currently zoned R1, which today permits 1 dwelling unit? Are they all capable, or are they all automatically going to be able to have 4 dwelling units? The reason I asked this question was posed to me, sorry, Mr. Chairman, by a couple of residents trying to understand what this meant. So I'm repeating the question raised through my office. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So in this case, no, not necessarily. So the regulations still apply. So the R1 regulations still apply. So minimum lot width, minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So only based on size and the ability to meet the other regulations, would you be able to be permitted up to four units.
And I appreciate that clarification. That was my understanding. Second question or comment, CMHC has just released their housing guidelines, which I do believe show examples of missing middle. That guideline could potentially benefit this process and homeowners or persons with vacant that are contemplating development. Would that be your conclusion?
Ms. Peck, please.
Sorry, through the chair, Councillor Duguay, do you mind clarifying?
So yes, so CMHC has just released design guidelines for new home types, and there is clearly so this guideline. My question is, could it benefit somebody that is contemplating on an R1 lot, maybe a house that has 3 units?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, the design guidelines that CMHC has released, yes, they can definitely be used as a baseline to inform development of missing middle forms. I will mention that those guidelines also make reference to units within detached accessory structures. However, under this program and through the zoning bylaw amendment, for missing middle housing up to 4 units, we're contemplating in the 1 building. So you wouldn't be permitted to have a unit in a detached accessory structure in this instance.
Finally, Chair Parnell, I have one further question of Megan. Megan, thus we have, and I'll use Councillor Riel's example, South End. We have post-war homes, smaller elevated bungalows, and if somebody were to contemplate and create a larger dwelling, which does happen on occasion, will this process and how does this process then respond to servicing implications? That is, water, wastewater, serving this what's otherwise a smaller single unit dwelling. How will that be addressed?
So through the chair, this is where the development charge kind of rebate program comes into play, because the additional units would be subject to DC charges, which would pay for the cost of infrastructure upgrades or improvements. And through the missing middle CIP, a property owner may be eligible for DC rebates for up to 3 additional units.
Oh, if I might, to be clear, Megan, and perhaps it's maybe to Director Appleby or Commissioner Nelson, I'm assuming thus that our other divisions and stakeholder agencies will be quite involved upfront to determine that the water and wastewater septic or waste sanitary sewer facilities are adequate for the intensification contemplated by the missing middle. That would be correct?
Through the chair, yes, that'd be correct. It would go through the same process, or building permits would be required. It would be akin to ARUs, just one additional unit.
Chair Parnell, thank you, Megan, for that clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Burke.
Thanks, Chair, and through you to Ms. Peck. I have one last question about sort of how we're going to measure this, and I know that the report touches on that. So my question is about how we're going to monitor and measure and publicly report on the effectiveness of this amendment in creating truly inclusive mixed use, mixed income neighborhoods. My understanding is that staff will come back to council yearly. I think I'm reading that right now. To report or give recommendations on changing or modifying the program. So my question is about what will that look like for us at council, and then also how is this going to be measured? How are these changes going to be measured as having an impact to create those things I stated?
So through the chair, individuals who come forward and who want to partake in our CIP program, we will have a stringent monitoring of the funds released and the number of applications incentivized. Similar to how ARUs are currently being processed, they're being monitored and they are being kind of measured by the city's building division through building permits to kind of incent to see the uptake of those units. So I see this functioning in a similar way. The way that the CIP program specifically is drafted is that we can do some changes. We've, minor changes, ensuring that the spirit of the CIP remains in effect. But if we find that program eligibility needs to be tweaked slightly, we can do that without an amendment to the CIP. But for more substantial changes and monitoring, then it would require a report to council.
But through the chair, I guess the question I'm asking is about the actual impact of the program, and is that only going to be measured in how many people are activating it, like the number of applicants activating it?
Through the chair, I guess, Councillor Burke, if you don't mind clarifying, like in terms of the number of units being incentivized.
Yeah, so no, I'm not. I'm asking a question about the monitoring and evaluation of the success or failure of the program, how it's working. And within the report, there's a 4.6 program monitoring and evaluation. And so is that evaluation going to be substantiated on just the amount of applicants that are taking advantage of these changes that we're enacting today? Is that the only criteria, or are we going to have other criteria? Because the report also spells out the reason for the need of doing this is to create truly affordable, inclusive, mixed income neighborhoods, accessible neighborhoods. So my question is about, like, how are we monitoring that outcome?
Ms. Peck, Ms. Kimball had her hand up also. She may help you with that question.
Certainly. Yes. I will defer to the manager of policy and planning.
Ms. Kimball, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Burke. I think part of the, I guess, approach to the monitoring will be through our reporting back to CMHC. We are obligated under the half contribution agreement to report back. And insofar as the missing middle CIP and the zoning amendment that's before you today are milestones in and initiatives under that program, we are obligated to report back to CMHC as to sort of their, the uptake, the implications of those programs being put into place. So we have, it's a little difficult to measure because, some of those successes under the program may be due to multiple initiatives. But we have assigned a target, I believe it was approximately 80 units to be created
over the 3-year period for which we would be anticipating receiving funds through CMHC.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And the point is we're being asked to make a change tonight as council. And there's a cost attached to that. It may not be a cost that's directly on the back of the municipality, but there's a cost to taxpayers from this funding, the federal funding. And as a councillor, I just want to make sure that the sales pitch we're being given for the need to do this is either recognized in the success of the project, or there's some sort of measurable things that we can look at for staff to come back to us and say, you know what, this actually isn't working. It's not creating the accessibility to housing that we need in our community, and we need to do something different. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Peck? Saying none, thank you very much. I will make one quick comment, though. I am happy to hear you articulate that, yes, building permits are necessary to add these units to any dwelling that could possibly do so. This is very important because we need this extra housing, but we also need safe housing that meets fire code. And anybody who wants to go down this road also needs to be very open and transparent with their insurance companies as well. So thank you very much for all of that very important information for our community. Thank you. Okay, and we do not have any registered delegates this evening. I am aware that Councillor Jiguet would like to move the motion.
Chair Parnell, I'd be pleased to do so for committee discussion purposes. I'll comment later as
Okay.
part of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is on the floor now. Any Mayor Leal, please.
Well, thanks very much, Chair Purnell. And you always know when you have a well-done comprehensive report, what it supports many of the concepts that were just recently outlined by Dr. Mike Moffat. Dr. Moffat, as many you will know, is been very active on the housing policy front in Canada for a period of time. And he just released a recent study called the Missing Middle Initiative. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of things from his report that I think blend in quite nicely with our report this evening. He actually, an interesting number he came up with. He said that roughly 80,000 people are moving from the GTA every year to other parts of Ontario. And he identified that the favorite choice for those 80,000 people are Brantford, Tillsonburg, and Peterborough because of the 407 link. And what is interesting about this number also is that when you look at the demographic profile, these are young professionals, ages 25 to 34, and have children under 5. So if you're looking at a cohort to really help your community, this is the cohort that you want to have move into your community. And this particular cohort will continue to drive until they can qualify to buy housing or rent housing. Interesting to know, for many of us around this table today, it took an average of 5 years to save up to provide a 20% down payment on a starter home. That number has now increased dramatically. It takes 17 years across Canada and 27 years if you live in the GTA. So you really understand why people are moving out of the GTA to other parts of Ontario, and certainly looking at Peterborough. So I think, that data clearly supports of what we're trying to do in this report, and use those HAF funds to provide a policy framework that will allow us to construct more housing. The other thing that's interesting is I had a quiet moment last week, and I actually read a couple of speeches from John Robarts. Mr. Robarts, of course, was the Ontario Premier from 1961 to 1971. And you'd asked, why would I be reading speeches in Hansard from Premier Robarts? What is interesting, what he said in the early 1960s, just because there was a housing crisis then. And essentially what he said, you got to divide the housing market into two areas, market housing and non-market housing. And I thought of that for a while because we spent a lot of time around this table twisting ourselves in a pretzel to define affordability. And essentially, Premier Robarts did it in a very simple way. And what did he do to address non-market housing? He built Ontario Housing in every community across Ontario. So when we have our discussions in the next little while about affordability, and maybe our conversations are going to really boil down to those two areas and what we can do as a community in the non-market housing field. And I just will conclude, Madam Chair, with some remarks from a speech that was made by the new housing minister, Nathan Erskine Smith, to the
Thank you, Mayor Leo. Councillor Vasiliadis, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say the presentation was great. And I get this is legislated, so we have to come up with our own model on how to do this. And we've come a long way because I don't know if you recall my first term, Glencairn, there was going to be a duplex on Glencairn, and the neighborhood didn't welcome it. And then there was a rooming house on Park Hill where what wanted to go from R1 to R2. And the neighborhood didn't really welcome it. And most recently up in Oakwood Drive, property sold, and they wanted to break it down into 3 individual lots. And I think it ended up being 2 lots, but the neighborhood didn't welcome it. So, neighborhoods generally don't welcome 4plexes into an R1 residential neighborhood. And what I'm saying is, trust me, I understand times are changing. And so things are changing. Now, back in 2019, when we brought forward the idea of secondary suites, I actually didn't, I know it was legislated back then, and I didn't actually vote for it because one thing that comes up in our area is like parking and how does a neighborhood adjust to such a thing? And I'm going to read the motion. I never did receive a report back, but I'm wondering if we can break it down to understand that with new enforcement, some of the new things we've done this term, perhaps we can help neighborhoods adjust to such things. But the motion is that staff report back to council as a part of the 2019 budget deliberations on options to convert to a proactive model for enforcement of the parking bylaws for the current complaint-driven model, which I think we still do the complaint-driven model, and that the report details projected costs, revenues associated with these options to complement the implementation of the new secondary suites regulations in the city. Now, I didn't really want to ask Megan this because I didn't think it was fair because there's a lot of history to it, but maybe through you, Madam Chair, to Director Appleby or Commissioner Nelson, can you break down, are we following any of this motion to help neighborhoods adjust to such a change?
Through the chair, I'll take an initial stab and I'll defer to Director Appleby if he has anything further to add. There have been a number of initiatives that have come in play. I think you're correct. I'm not certain that there's been a definitive report specifically on that, but a multitude of other initiatives. One is obviously changing with the municipal law enforcement section, in which obviously the availability of additional enforcement to go out and try to be more proactive as those resources increase. The other thing that comes into play is a reduction on new planning and zoning requirements for reduced parking requirements. One of the other initiatives that we're moving forward on is looking at the ability of the on-street parking permit program, which will be coming this year at some point. So that study will be commenced this year and reported on whether it be later this year, the beginning of next year. But again, all of that in a perspective of trying to address more parking or address those parking issues per se, and possibly look at opportunities that we can park more vehicles. So I think there's a number of initiatives that are going down the road you're speaking of. Don't have a definitive answer right at this moment, but they're definitely something that's being looked at.
No, thanks. And I know that it's not necessarily having more cars parked on the roadway. I know that sometimes can be the issue too, but whatever we can do to help neighborhoods adjust to the change. And because I mean, we will get calls about it, right? And perhaps even whether it's going to be posted on our website, something that we can point to and say, well, this is what you do. And but just I know I've asked that question in the past, and I'm just asking it again. Thank you.
Thank you. 16 seconds to go. Good job. So we have 2 more questions or speakers, Councillor Burke, then Councillor Riel. Councillor Burke, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Parnell. And I'm just jumping into the conversation here. I think my comments to staff about the idea of parking being a barrier to this, I think that we have to address the situation downtown with the parking garages, with the vacancy rate of the parking garages, not only to address the parking issues that could arise from something like this, but also as a source of revenue for the municipality. So that's my one comment. And then, you know, I just really wholeheartedly appreciate through the chair the comments from Mayor Leal about affordability. You know, I think affordability is definitely the elephant in the room when we look to making all these changes to push the building community to build in the way that we need to. I think affordability is the elephant in the room. The difference between, you know, 2025 and that post-war era is that in that era, you could go to work at a factory and you could make enough to cover all of your monthly expenses in the first week of your job. And so then the rest is just gravy. And, you know, people of my generation are spending, you know, 80, 90, 95% of their income on cost of living. You know, so I think that as a municipality, while we're tackling making these changes to support growth, I think we have to look creatively at ways in which we can address affordability. You know, we're in charge of property taxes for homeowners. You know, I'm sure that there's ways that we can be creative with how, or maybe not, but I'm hopeful that there's ways that we can look at how we're taxing first-time homeowners, young homeowners, to create more accessibility for people that are paying in some. I'm part of the transient group from Toronto. I was in Toronto for a couple of decades, and I moved back here with my family. We had to put 35% down, and you know, I have people my age that are paying $2,500 rent in Toronto, self-employed, and they can't get a mortgage, but they've been paying that high cost for years that have gone to their landlords. So it's just a comment. It's a bit of a long-winded comment to say that I hope that adjacent to this, we can sort of look at ways that we can be creative in addressing the attached elephant in the room, which is the affordability crisis. You know, you can have all the houses and condos and beautiful new builds in the city that you want, but if people can't afford to live there, then we're just going to be stuck with the same problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Riel, then Councillor Lachika. Councillor Riel, you have the floor.
Through the chair, when I read this report, I said to myself, Keith, what is most of the phone calls you get? And the phone calls usually happen when there's going to be a change in their neighborhood, and it happens when there's going to be a building going up or a change. And I think all councillors get the same thing. Whenever there's something going to be built that may change the characteristic of the neighborhood, our phone and our email light up. And so I read this report because I think staff tried to do the best job to protect not only us, but the citizens of this exclusionary zoning bylaw. And I say that because, and I think the mayor highlighted this, we are under the federal and provincial government to do something about housing. And if we don't do it, they're going to make sure we do it. So I think it's staff's job to write a report to try and help and soften the impact to the neighborhoods, but also the people. And then when people phone me up and said, you know, why are they putting this in? I says, because if we don't do it, the federal and provincial government, the people can go to LPAT and they will do it. And so we try to do the best we can to help the people with this. And that's why I felt this report did that we have to do it so we can answer some of the questions, but also give us some tools to help us along this way and to safeguard, and some of the comments I made, safeguard the characteristics of the neighborhood, but also some sort of cautionary that if you do this, because I know that I'm going to get phone calls, why the hell is my assessment just gone up and you did this to me? And I says, well, but again, I'm resawing sawdust here, that we are being forced to make changes on and how we move the city forward, and that's certainly on the building file. And we're only complying with what the federal and provincial government want us to do. So this is one of the options, and this is one of the tools. And I think that staff have done a pretty good job at doing that for us.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair Parnell. Appreciating what previous speakers said from Monaghan Ward about, considerations of parking, et cetera. The brilliance of this report and of this new bylaw is that it aligns, and I mentioned alignment earlier, with our transportation master plan, that we'll be finding that as we move forward progressively with that, we'll see people using different mode share, and we'll see people using our buses. We're seeing our buses get fuller, and it really does align with this gentle intensification, with proximity, as we intensify our neighborhoods and get that housing built. It's easier to get around on foot, on cycles, and in buses. So it's exciting that this again aligns with our transportation master plan and the good work that we've done on putting that all together. Thank you so much, and I look forward to supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Duguay, please.
Thank you, Chair Parnell. As the mover of the motion, I'd like to offer some commentary. The half funding, our second and third increments, clearly is the instrument that we will be using to address in large part meaningful ways to achieve not our non-market rent accommodation. So that's important. The decision we make tonight, which I assume will be in the positive, is going to be monitored very closely by the federal and provincial government. We have an obligation by virtue of the half funding, second and third installments, to carry out programs that have been outlined here tonight. To Councillor Burke's comment, he's not here, but I'll continue. The characterization being made of the development community is undeserved and unfair, because it's not the development community that's necessarily going to be the only persons that will benefit from missing middle housing. It could be the young couple that has bought, the young professionals that have bought a vacant lot, that are looking at housing options above and beyond the AR unit option. So it's unfair to characterize the development community that would be taking advantage of this opportunity. I see this as an opportunity being afforded to our community. I think even Mayor Leal, you made a comment about Premier Roberts' initiation of the Ontario Housing Corporation and various that housing forum. That was built by developers, but it was also built by individual homeowners. It was built both ways. So in summary, Chair Parnell, I support the initiative. We are not the only community taking on this task, but this has some unique Peterborough characteristics and flavor. And congratulations for staff to recognize, to Councillor Vassiliadis' point, that we are being respectful and mindful of neighborhood context. Ms. Peck said during her presentation, you just can't get automatically a 4-unit house. You are still obligated to meet the zoning regulations. So within that building envelope, you might have 1 unit, you might have 2, you might have 3, you might have 4, or you might still rely upon the ARU option that allows you to have 1 in the main house, 1 in the basement. This is flexibility being afforded to development community and new homeowners both. It meets the 2024 PPS, meets our strategic plan, meets our city's official plan. And I am very satisfied with this necessary direction, and I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Leal, please.
Madam Chair, just one little point, and I don't have a crystal ball, but presuming the climate change report gets approved, I just want to note that one of the key bullets, the big moves target in the following areas, it says land use transform urban design and land use to implement sustainable actions to achieve higher densification. I just want to remind colleagues when they're lined up 6 deep with an application to increase the density, we'll remind ourselves if we approve that climate change policy.
Thank you. Last call for any comment. Seeing none, we'll go to a vote, please. Mr. Clerk, Madam Clerk. Sorry, folks, we're just having a little technical difficulty. If you can bear with us, please. Madam Clerk, do you have can you see the vote? Okay, so that is passed. I believe it was unanimous, but I haven't seen okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. That has passed unanimously. Thank you. And that concludes the planning portion of our meeting, and I will pass this meeting back over to Chair Beamer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And some of you have asked, so yes, there will be dinner provided between this meeting and council between around 5:36 we're aiming. Okay, thank you, Councillor Purnell, for that. So we do have one presentation, Climate Change Action Plan 2.0, and I think we have Mr. Byrne. Welcome, Mr. Byrne. Good to see you. Hello, sir.
Hello, through you, Chair. Before I pass the podium over to our consultant from Sustainability Solutions Group, I want to provide a bit of context for the Climate Change Action Plan. So with the plan's completion, staff now have direction for realizing community greenhouse gas emissions reduction through the development of new plans and policies that will help us achieve our net zero targets. The plan now is in full alignment with scientific consensus that to realize scientific consensus that emissions abatement needs to be achieved by 2050 to help us halt the global temperature rise that is amplifying severe weather events. The plan now is in full alignment with the climate emergency declaration that was passed in 2019 by City Council. And last but not least, the plan has identified several significant co-benefits with the implementation of the plan for our community, those being improved health outcomes, job creation, heightened social equity, that will help Peterborough achieve our goals, and in combination with tremendous savings with the investment in climate action by 2050. So if over the next 25 years, if the plan is fully realized, Peterborough has much to gain from it. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the podium on to Darren Crockett, who is the Senior Modeler and Project Manager with Sustainability Solutions Group. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here, and thank you for the introduction as well, James. So I'm going to be giving an overview of Climate Action Plan 2.0 that was developed for the city of Peterborough. My presentation is organized into 3 sections. The first section will talk about the plan objectives and how it was developed. The second section will talk about the low carbon future and big moves. So these are the different transformations that are envisioned and quantified in the plan. And then the last section is about the economic benefits and implementation opportunities associated with the plan. Oops. So this plan is a sequel to the first Climate Action Plan, which was developed in 2016. And that established a commitment to take actions to reduce emissions, to reduce the use of fossil fuels, and to lower energy consumption, as well as adapting to climate change. Since that time, the City Council of Peterborough issued a climate action or climate emergency declaration in 2019 that set a more aggressive target for emissions reductions and increased the urgency of putting a climate lens on city policies and actions. So the plan that we're presenting today is in alignment with this climate emergency declaration, and it seeks to achieve net zero by the year 2050, which is consistent with the more ambitious goal that was set by the climate emergency declaration. So this plan was developed in phases. First phases started with data collection and calibration in conjunction with pre-engagement, in which SSG involved interested and affected parties in the community to determine how they would want to be engaged as part of this plan development. And that fed into the engagement plan. And as part of the engagement plan, we established a community working group that included members of the business community, local community groups, utilities, as well as students. And this group met for 3 workshops over the course of several months. And we had about participation of 25 people in those workshops. Additionally, there was a focus group that was focused on a smaller group of people. They participated in 1 virtual meeting, as well as there were 2 one-on-one phone interviews with that group of people. And finally, there was a phone survey of 500 Peterborough residents, as well as an online questionnaire that was answered by 54 people. And we used the outcomes of these engagement sessions to provide input to understand what were the current greenhouse gas emission reductions that were in place in Peterborough, what was the level of interest in taking further action, what were barriers to potential actions, and then what were opportunities for implementation. So that engagement plan has kind of established itself in the middle of our process to provide feedback to the other phases. The next phase was context gathering, where we reviewed policies and plans that currently exist in Peterborough, as well as best practices in similar communities. All of that fed into scenario modeling, where we quantified different pathways and what the emissions trajectories looks like using different assumptions about future scenarios in Peterborough. That led into our benefits analysis and the financial analysis, which I'll be showing in a few slides. And all of that came together into the draft and final plan that we are presenting today. So as a starting point, we took an emission snapshot of Peterborough for the year 2021. So in 2021, we estimated that there are about 537 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalents emitted. The main sector that those emissions are coming from is the transportation sector, followed by the residential and commercial sectors. In the transportation sector, as you can see in this graph, the emissions are coming from equal parts from gasoline and diesel. So gasoline is coming from cars and light trucks, so personal use vehicles, whereas the diesel emissions are primarily from medium to heavy duty trucks as well as off-duty vehicles. On the building side, the emissions are primarily coming from natural gas that's being used for space heating. So with that as our starting point, we made projections, and this is where we get into exploratory analysis. So it's a layered approach where we start with building up a reference scenario. So our starting point for our reference scenario is what we call our business as usual. And our business as usual, we basically hold what is the context in 2021 steady, but we make assumptions about population projections. So as we've been discussing, population is expected to increase by the numbers we had by 21% between now and 2050. Employment is also expected to increase and housing units are expected to increase. And we plugged in those trends and without making any other assumptions, we just let those trends impact emissions. And that's what we're seeing in the business as usual graph. Right next to it is the business as planned graph. And this is where we put in assumptions that incorporate existing plans and policies. So we looked at the official plan, the transportation master plan, the cycling master plan, waste facility management, as well as the national goal of vehicle electrification by 2035. And we looked at what the impacts of those policies were to the emissions. And as you can see, it does reduce the emissions by 2050. There is a slight downward trend as opposed to an upward trend, but it's not at the net zero emissions by 2050. But that's just our starting point. That's our canvas that we're working from. The good news is in this analysis, we were able to establish different pathways that lead to significant emission reductions by 2050. And these pathways, we call them low carbon scenarios. Each of those scenarios contains 7 big moves, and each big move is a sector-specific transformation. And each big move comprises mitigation actions. And in total, there are 17 mitigation actions that we analyzed. And from those, we make 15 implementation recommendations that are steps that the city can take to put the city on the path of meeting these mitigation actions. So just as a context for the big moves, our paradigm is basically our priority for the types of actions that we considered. So the highest priority actions were ones in which emissions are avoided. So for example, switching to active transportation and not using a vehicle at all. So avoiding emissions in that way. The second priority action type is a reduction in energy use. So this would be actions that promote higher energy efficiency. The third priority is replacing. So this is fuel switching. So this is switching to higher emitting fuel sources to lower or zero emitting fuel sources. And then finally, there's removal. So this is using natural systems for sequestration or also carbon capture as a sequestration. And then finally, offset when there are residual emissions that cannot be addressed any other way. You look at economic mechanisms such as renewable energy credits as an example. This slide is just to show why we look at the entire pathway as opposed to just looking at where we land in 2050, because how you get there matters. The leftmost chart here with the green is showing that if you take actions sooner in a timeline, overall, you'll result in fewer emissions over the entire timeline. In contrast to the rightmost graph, which is showing if emission or if action is delayed, you still land in the same place as the graph on the left, but you've emitted more along that timeline. And so your cumulative emissions are significantly more. So with all that said, the 7 big moves that we explore in this report are green buildings, sustainable transportation, energy supply, waste, industry, forestry and carbon capture, and the land use big move. With all of the actions within these moves combined, our scenarios all showed a 70% reduction relative to 2021 levels. The graph on the right is our, oh, I'm sorry about that. The graph on the right is our, what we call our wedge diagram. And it shows a progression of emissions reductions where each wedge is associated with a specific action. And so that we can see step by step how we're achieving that 70% reduction. And the top line is the business as planned emissions trajectory that we were looking at on a previous slide. So if you work your way down, you can see that we land at the bottom of this yellow wedge. That's the 70% reduction mark. The other lines on this graph are for context. The blue line represents the additional reductions that can be achieved if the grid were entirely zero emitting, so a 100% renewable grid. And then the other line is it represents the emissions trajectory that is consistent with the Paris Accord 1.5 degree global warming agreement. So it's the most ambitious target from Paris, and that's just as a point of context. So taking a closer look at this wedge diagram, the largest reductions are coming from the green buildings and the sustainable transportation big moves. So in the green buildings, it's through energy efficiency as well as fuel switching, so electrification. And in the sustainable transportation, it's creating a sustainable transportation system with expanded access to transit and active transportation and further vehicle electrification. The land use big move plays an important role, but in the context of our analysis, it's more of an enabling action that allows the green buildings and sustainable transportation actions to reap further reductions. Okay, so in terms of the financial analysis coming out of this, this report, we looked at community-wide investment, and I want to highlight that this capital expenditures that we're showing in this blue column is across the community. So it's a combination of private investment as well as municipal investment. And it represents the cost for retrofitting buildings, for new build construction, for vehicle purchases, and all capital expenditures that bring about these actions. But counter to that, below the line represents savings. And again, this is community-wide, but this yellow bar is representing energy expenditure savings that results from reducing energy. And it is about 10% higher in magnitude than the capital expenditure, which results in overall $232 million in savings over the course of the period of 2024 to 2050. In modeling, we started a little bit back in time, but basically from current time through 2050, that is the modeled savings. And it also results in $51 of saving for every ton of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced. Yeah. If I were making this presentation a year ago, I would have been able to include the avoided taxes, the carbon taxes bar that's also showing significant savings in green, and that would have pushed the net savings up to close to $1 billion. But unfortunately, we're living in a world where we still see significant savings, but we don't get to the $1 billion mark. In terms of the short-term opportunities and steps that the report recommends that the city takes, The next few slides show actions over the next 5 years. The estimated implementation cost for these actions is $20.5 million for the city, but again, that's over the next 5 years. The first actions in the first year are to accelerate the implementation of current policies and plans. So using what Peterborough has already developed and accelerate as much as possible. So implement the official plan and secondary plans, and expedite intensification studies and increase density targets, what we've already been talking about today. The second point is, and that will result community-wide in cumulative savings of up to 1,800 kilotons. Additionally, start to collaborate with local educational institutions to start to meet future capacity needs. The types of actions in this report will require capacities for energy audits, building construction, retrofitting, heat pump maintenance, solar panel installation, and there's a big opportunity for job creation through all those actions. And to establish a local training program to work with local institutions, Peterborough would be well on the path to having that those jobs be local and filled by local resources. Year 2 is the actions are to design and pilot a voluntary green development standard. Green development standards they go beyond energy efficiency measures, and they can incorporate aspects such as community design, where you look at different housing type mixes or access to parks and open spaces, access to transit and active transportation, on-site renewable generation, low carbon building materials, drought resistant landscaping. So lots of other metrics that can be incorporated into a green development standard. And then also collaborate with stakeholders. The green development standards can lead to close to 980 kilotons of reductions cumulatively. And then collaborate with stakeholders for solo adoption. So set up an advisory service to help community members and businesses acquire power purchase agreements, or possibly work with stakeholders to look into bulk purchasing of solar panels. Installing rooftop solar and community solar will result in just over 300 kilotons of cumulative savings. Year 3 is to extend the home energy efficiency program. So this is in 2 parts. One is a market analysis to evaluate the soon-to-be launched program and look back and look at the performance. And then the second part is to look into ways to extend the program and find funding sources. Other actions include collaborating with freight and commercial sectors to look into last mile delivery options. For example, encouraging businesses to purchase e-cargo bikes for delivery in downtown areas, or an EV car sharing program for businesses. Also engaging with contractors to reduce off-road emissions. This could be working with project developers and contractors to develop vehicle efficiency and anti-idling requirements. And finally, in later years, just establish educational and outreach campaigns for waste management. So programs to promote the best practices for reducing and recycling and understanding the benefits of that, as well as promoting a circular economy. And for the urban forestry, defining a communication strategy that details the benefits of urban trees for the city and its residents, and facilitate volunteer planting days in neighborhoods with limited tree canopy coverage. I'll close by saying that this is a very ambitious plan. It will require a coordinated effort between the city and community partners, but the benefits are also very compelling. Not only the benefit of significant reductions to emissions, but the potential for savings and energy costs, as well as the social benefits of having affordable, livable, walkable communities with lower pollution, where these opportunities are available for everyone. So I'm very excited about this plan, and it was a absolute pleasure to develop this with the city of Peterborough, and I thank you for your time.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you very much. So I know Councillor Cheeky, you want to move it and we'll get to you, but just any questions of the presenter first? Councillor Hakey, Councillor Degay, Councillor Hakey, questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I read it thoroughly, so I didn't know that we interviewed 584 people. I thought that was a small sample, but one of the slides that you referred to was you had savings of 232 million. Maybe you could just flip to that.
Yep.
Any idea of the cost or the investment we have to make to save $232 million?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So what kind of investment would the public or private people have to make to realize $233 million in savings?
Okay, so you would like to know what the split in that the column. I do not have that number offhand, but it would be the majority of that column would be through private investors from the community and not the city.
Oh, okay, maybe I'll be a bit clearer then. The total investment required to save 232 million, whether it's public or private. Any idea?
Sorry. Just under that's just under 2 billion.
Under 2 billion.
Under 2 billion. Yeah, but that's over the 25-year
years.
period.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hakey. Councillor Degay, questions?
Yes, thanks, Chair Beamer. And Chair Beamer, I must apologize to our speaker. I did not, I was out of the room when you started, so I'm not sure how to best address you.
Oh, you can call me Darren.
Darren?
Yeah.
All right. So Darren, thank you. On the Big 7 wins, page 5 of the report. So there's the Big 7 move, sorry. And one of your slides, you talked about one of the primary sources impact is felt through transportation.
Yep.
Correct.
That's correct.
Right. So to that extent, to how did and to what extent did your research consider local versus non-local transportation? Mm-hmm. Because we're a regional serving site and a lot of roads lead to Peterborough and lead out of Peterborough, and it's not all local transportation utilizing our road network.
Yes, through the chair. The emissions that we show there they do include some trips that cross the boundary of Peterborough. So we used an accounting framework for this emissions snapshot of the GHG protocol for communities. And in that protocol, it distinguishes between trips that are entirely within the community. Those are scope 1, what is termed scope 1 emissions. So all of that activity contributes to the emissions. And then it also looks at trips that cross the boundary. So both outgoing and incoming. And for those trips, half of the distance is included in the emissions inventory. So I would say that is partly, some of those emissions are in fact coming from trips that are originating in Peterborough, going out, and then coming from outside of Peterborough, coming in.
Thank you. Chair Beamer, I have a supplementary question. You referenced a voluntary green development standard. One of your slides, I think it was in year 2 or 3. Sorry, I wasn't able to access the PowerPoint presentation. Right there, year 2. So that's a voluntary green development standard. And the word standard has certain connotations in these chambers. Standard means you don't have a choice. I know it says voluntary and standard. That's a bit of a juxtaposition, but nonetheless, would that green development standard, because it says voluntary, will it eventually, is it contemplated that it becomes mandated? or compulsory?
I can't speak to, oh, through the chair. I can't speak to whether it is, it will become mandatory, but the idea is that you establish metrics and provide incentives for developers to follow those metrics. And over time, the idea is that it becomes just part of standard practice. So it's almost like it might not need to get mandated. It just becomes established best practice.
Mr. Chairman, it's perhaps more of a comment, but the word standard to me, within the context of these chambers, means it's regulatory. There's not a sense of obligation. I would prefer the word guideline be referenced. And I'm certainly encouraged that we would contemplate alternate building techniques. And I wanted to get to, if I had this screen here, the $20.5 million. That's the cost to implement the 5 years of services. But I'm having difficulties understanding what we're spending $20 million on.
Through the chair, the report gets into further details about how these costs are broken out. Some of them are just cost for studies to explore, for an intensification study or a parking management study. The bulk of this 20.5 million is actually for funding for the extension of the HEAP program. And I should say in these actions, the other component that is laid out in the report is the role that the city of Peterborough is playing. So for some of these actions, the city acts as a collaborator. For some of the actions, the city acts as in its planning function or its regulation function. In some cases, it acts as even an incubator to develop new ideas. And so in terms of the cost, it's for activities that support those different roles, but primarily for studies and for funding the extension of the HEAP program.
Mr. Chairman, are we permitted to ask questions of staff later?
Later, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions of the presenter, Councillor Reel and Burke. Councillor Reel.
To the chair, to Darren. Most of our plans that we have, the official plan, the transportation master plan, and certainly the first reiteration of the climate change that we passed, they talk about transit or transportation, getting people out of their cars, taking our transit system, riding a bike or whatever. So what is the first reiteration of making that happen? Because it's very expensive to electrify a whole system. Is it when you have the ridership, like we have diesel buses right now? Is it that you have the ridership to augment the cost of electrifying your fleet, or just electrifying your fleet? Because to electrify all of the city of Peterborough would be extremely expensive. You could do it on your major routes that are probably making money for you. But what is the plan, the transportation master plan, especially to transit, when you would leverage that and go over to the other side to electrify? Maybe an unfair question.
Yeah, through the chair, I can't speak to where that crossover point would be. Generally, the plan supports, the climate action plan supports establishing the targets or following through on the targets of the transportation master plan, and really focusing on compact city development so that more people have access to transit service routes. And in that way, they're encouraged to use the system more. And that's actually something that came out of a lot of our engagement. That was a lot of feedback that we heard, was that most people right now don't use transit because of it doesn't come frequently enough, or it doesn't go to where they want to go. But if we start to focus more on developing kind of closer communities and increasing just maybe route service, that would encourage the use. But yes, you're right. At some point, there is going to have to be an investment in the electrification of the fleet. And like I said before, I can't speak to where that crossover point would happen.
Fuel cell, say hydrogen,
yes,
whatever it is, or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Reel. Councillor Burke, questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Beamer, and through you to Darren. Thanks so much for the report. Appreciate it. I have sort of just like a wild card question, I guess. But you talked about the need to have the community also pitch in this effort to help hit our targets. What would you say, with your knowledge and expertise, you know, could you just speak to the general public who's watching? What are some of the most impactful steps that they can take to help us hit this target?
Through the chair. So once the HEAP program comes online, I would say take advantage of that. Existing buildings are a huge segment of Peterborough's stock of buildings right now, and they're a very big wedge in the emissions reductions. But beyond that, I would say any action at all is important. So making choices to reduce vehicle trips and increase walking or biking, making decisions to compost more, to not to repair items before just disposing of them. Like little things build up, and they make a difference.
Thanks. And through the chair, I'll never forget, but when it was pretty early on in the council term, we had a presentation for development right across the street here, and the neighborhood came really in response to the lack of parking. And it was a very heated discussion. And the feedback that I got from a constituent after the fact that had stuck with me was that I guess the regionally specific culture of our city is that for those that are living in the downtown core, like you can't really walk anywhere to buy a pair of socks and underwear. You can't really walk necessarily anywhere to get groceries for your family. So how do we as a city encourage a move back to have, more mom and pop corner grocery stores, more places that will support neighborhoods as they're growing and changing? Is there anything creative that we as a city can do to encourage that?
Through the chair, beyond just exploring and establishing ties to the community, and especially the business community, and providing incentives for certain businesses to be in certain locations and promoting mixed use developments, there's a sort of, you kind of have to bring components together and then let things develop from there. And so I see the city's role as establishing conditions to allow that to happen. And certainly all of this talk of, again, mixed use development and densification, that all sets the stage for bringing businesses to communities, bringing the grocery stores, bringing clothing stores to serve that population.
Thank you, Chair. Darren, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Any further questions? Darren, thanks so much for all your hard work and being here this evening. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so we have some recommendations in front of us. Speakers, I have Councillor Lechika. Councillor Lechika.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to move this motion, and Darren, just wanted to say thank you to you for that presentation, and particularly to James Byrne, who has really spearheaded so much of the work and organization that was involved in all the different scaffolded tiers of this Climate Action Plan 2.0. And also to Ian Boland, I know so much of what you contribute to our green lens here at the City of Peterborough means so much. And, I happen to be participating in one of the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal Workshop groups. And when I walked into that room and saw just the plethora of folks and community members, and we have our active community environmental organizations represented here tonight. So many minds, so many hearts, and impassioned work was at that table. So the scope of it was amazing that went into all of this, the planning and the different parts of it. And nothing like an extreme weather event to remind us of the importance of climate mitigation and climate adaptation, because both parts are really important. Our City of Peterborough is also a member of Climate Caucus, which is a national organization that discusses, shares, encourages initiatives that have to do with green standards that we were discussing and that was presented about tonight. And we really are hearing, and we love to share the achievements. And we are such a leader to be able to talk about our green fire hall, our LEED certified building, and all the different things we're doing in this climate action plan. Sharing that with the Climate Caucus and municipal leaders from all across Canada is a huge privilege. So it's great that we're involved in this leadership. I'm thrilled to be able to move the motion and trust that as we've heard, not only is climate action good for the planet, for our future, but it's fiscally responsible. It means savings. So thank you very much. And through you, Chair, I look forward to moving the motion.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Chica. So moved by Councillor Chica. Councillor Burke.
Thanks, Chair Beamer. This is a question, please, maybe for Mr. Reyna or Mr. Nelson, Commissioner Nelson. So we have identified what the work that we need to do to hit the targets. We have identified what that work looks like in terms of all the things that were laid out in the report. Do you think that we could ever come back to the idea that I think we discussed pretty early on into the term, where we could just have attached to our agenda and the reports like a climate lens, so that we can look at if what we're talking about is congruent to this target and meets the recommendations from staff and the consultant, or if it doesn't?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Very good point. I think currently we are doing it through our strategic plan, but we will look into it. We will discuss during SLT and we'll come back to you.
And, you know, just doesn't have to be long-winded. It can just be like a check mark that this complies with what's being approved or not. It would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Burke. Councillor Reel.
Through the chair to Mr. Nelson, I want to thank Mr. Nelson. I sent him a few questions on the weekend. And one of the questions I sent is, does this report guarantee that the lens of climate change will be incorporated in any reports and anything that we do going forward? And I reiterate that it's nice that you have a report and that it will be passed and it's warm and fuzzy, but if it's a report that sits on the shelf and does absolutely nothing for climate change, and we just kind of spin our wheels, can you give me some sort of guarantee that staff will be looking at that climate lens on any reports or anything coming forward? And I'll give you a couple examples. We just built 3 brand new buildings that, in my estimation, should have solar panels on them, but they don't. We have several buildings in our stock that could have solar panels on it that either could be used to help with the cost of the electrifying or helping the cost of running that building, but also selling the power that's generated there back into the grid. So that's kind of where I'm going here. How can you give me some comfort that this just isn't something that's warm and fuzzy that sits on the shelf, that's actually we're going to use the lens of climate change on decisions we make as a council?
Through the chair, thanks for the question, Councillor Rial. So the city's already doing a number of initiatives that is taking in that climate change. First off, through the annual budget, there is into the climate change action plan, there's annual budgets that are dedicated to that. The city has hired Mr. Byrne, who is our climate change manager. Mr. Byrne is very much involved with too many projects almost, that he has an involvement associated with it to ensure that there's that climate lens looked at through it. You know, the projects that you bring up and the buildings that have recently been built, again, are the recent fire hall that was built is basically the equivalent of a Canadian net zero building. So it is already looked at with that climate change lens on it. You speak of the solar panels. Again, those buildings are, it's my understanding that those buildings have been built with the ability to expand on that. As part of the presentation, the 20.5 million that is the estimated city's investment, a chunk of that, approximately 3.5 million, is to look at those opportunities to put those photovoltaic panels on the buildings and try and expand. It was a condition of obviously trying to work within the budgets that we had at the time. However, as I say, my understanding is the buildings are equipped to future ready and make them available for that, for those photovoltaic cells and panels on it, that we can have those solar panels. And that would be very much looked at through future opportunities, funding opportunities and budgets that would make that ability to us. And you know, that kind of hits on that component of with the investment comes return. And that's exactly where you're speaking to that point. And that would be realized if we're able to make that investment at some point. But again, looking at it from a fiscally responsible component in which we take advantage of opportunities and funding opportunities that become available to us through other levels of government and or agencies.
Chair, to Mr. Nelson, you know, and I'm quite cognizant that there is a cost associated with doing this kind of business, but when I look at the potential out to 2050 of billions of dollars of savings and what it could mean to the community, I'm going, well, we have to start somewhere. So we have these opportunities, like you said, either from the senior levels of government, but also ourselves. What can we do? We have this plan, but if we don't initiate it, then we're stuck in neutral. And that's what I look at. I'm looking at 2050 and a couple $2 billion of savings, but if nothing is ever done to augment that, then all we have is a report.
Through the chair, hear you again. It refers back to within the report. We've seen the graph of, you know, the more we can do sooner, the better impact we have. So with that comes, again, as I referenced Mr. Byrne and the good work that he's doing, this is constantly looked at and look for those opportunities and try to bring forward any opportunity. Like, again, as I illustrated in the home energy efficiency program, the HEAT program, the Better Homes Peterborough, is a prime example of one that the city is taking advantage of those external levels of funding, and the city's involvement is fairly minor, which is good, but it could recognize if we get an uptake from the community to better fit those homes, their homes, and make them more energy efficient, it's a win for everyone on that. So it will be a continued effort, and it will have to be a continued effort. And I'll defer to Commissioner Freeman with some additional information.
Yep, Commissioner Freeman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just supplement the comments being made, and I hear the councillor, just a couple of points. The Miskinlaw Community Centre, it's structurally ready for solar panels whenever a good opportunity arises, whenever there is a funding opportunity. So we'll certainly be keeping our ear to the ground on that. And in terms of fire station number 2, the solar panels are already on the roof.
Thank you very much for that, Commissioner Freeman. Councilor Chika, second time.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair Beamer. Through you, just on the topic of discussion around the HEAT program, Better Homes Peterborough, the new name for that. We're just so grateful for our partners in this city, and GreenUp has been exacting that program. And will be going forward this year. So because we're a special city in terms of having organizations like GreenUp to be able to hold and cradle and nurture these particular climate actions, we're really at an advantage. And it's great that we can just seize that, access it, and spread the good word about rain gardens and the Better Homes program, and that we do have just a stalwart green community in this city, like very few other cities in this country. So it's really wonderful that we have that at our disposal. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Lachika. Councillor DeGay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. I'm not certain which commissioner I should direct this following question. During Darren's presentation, there was a slide that referenced the $20.5 million cost of the 5-year. And what's not still clear to me is who would be responsible for that expenditure. There was reference made during Darren's thorough presentation that programs such as a parking reduction, parking alternatives, and residential intensification would form part of that expenditure. It's my understanding we're already spending that money. But I'm trying to understand, of the 20.5 million, is that a taxpayer expense or how is that being derived? Because it wasn't clear during the presentation. And I'm not sure to which commissioner or staff, to Mr. Boland, who's looking right at me, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Boland.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor DeGay, I think I can address that. So the 20.5 were our short-term initiatives of city costs for the supporting actions that the city needs to do in the short term. But a majority of those costs, as you'll see, the 16 million of that 20.5 is for to re-engage the Better Homes Peterborough program after it's done its pilot. Of that 16 million, it would be staff's intent to seek external funding either through the province or the federal government, or even through a public-private partnership, which is similar to what we've done with the existing HEAP right now. So it wouldn't be our intent to come back to council looking for that full 60 million. We would definitely be seeking external funding. But yeah, in the near term, we have it around 1.14 million in the next 5 years or so. 3.35 for the solar installation, and then the 16 million for the home energy efficiency program, or Better Homes Peterborough.
If I may continue, then perhaps Mr. Boland, the concern I have with respect to our federal funding, there is particular uncertainty given we have a federal election forthcoming in less than 3 weeks, and we don't know the outcomes necessarily of same. So I'm not asking for a response, I'm expressing a concern. Mr. Boland, of the 16 million for our Better Homes Peterborough, how many houses could benefit from that $16 million taxpayer cost?
Through the chair to Councillor DeGay, I think I would have to get back to you on that or get my calculator out very quickly. So some of the costs to continue the HEAP would be administrative costs, but a good portion of it would be, it's actually loans. So it's funding that comes back to us. It's not necessarily funding that we give out and don't receive back. So the Better Homes Peterborough program is a loan program. So we do get that money back, so we're not losing out. There may be grants, we may look at grants and incentives and things in the future, but I think right now we look at the average, home renovation cost for energy efficiency is somewhere around $20,000 to $50,000. So, if you could divide that into 16 million or 14 to 16 million. So that would give you about the number of homes there would be, a fair amount anyway.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Boland, for the clarification that of the 16 million, it's not just it's more of a loan basis. So there is a recovery. I still remain concerned about the forthcoming federal election, the uncertainty about such programs across the board for our municipality. Those are my current questions. I may have more later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeGay. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Hakey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A lot of numbers bandied around tonight, no question. And we look at, I certainly look at what happened last week. Our power was out for 24 hours, but thank goodness I had natural gas to heat my home and I had propane to cook with. And those are two fuels that people want to get rid of. I'm not a believer, never have been, and everybody in this room knows not a believer in single sourcing anything, let alone power. There is a time to make these expenditures, considering what's happening with the US, considering that the US hasn't adopted any of these, it gives them a really big advantage. And then they tack on tariffs on top. If we look at the $20 million by itself, that's 2% a year on top of our regular tax base for the next 5 years. It's $4 million. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask a couple things. I'm going to ask that we vote separately on the items. And to Councillor Riel's point, I think it's time the council either puts up or moves on. And I understand doing things timely, but everybody keeps telling me there's no time here. So to be fair to everybody that's looking for this, of which I am not, I'd like to add an H to the thing, which is that the city of Peterborough's budgets from 2026 to 2031 include $4 million towards this project per year for the next 5 years. So again, that's 20 million. We just heard a figure of 2 billion to save 232 million. And the other thing that council has to consider here isn't necessarily just the climate, but we have to consider the money. Whether people like it or not, we do have to consider the money. We do have to consider the taxpayer. As his worship has pointed out, and rightfully so, our tax base and equity is 80% residential, 20% commercial. You start tacking on another 2% a year for the next 5 years, and I'll tell you what's going to happen. Within a week, the phone's going to be ringing off the hook. And it sounds great, and I like that. And that doesn't even include the biggest savings in this whole program is the transit. So I looked today very quickly. It's the median price for a 40-foot bus is $1.5 million. Goes from $1.3 million to $1.7 million, so I took the middle. We have 65 buses, which translates into a lot of money. But when you net out what you pay for a regular diesel bus, it's about $55 million also. So you divide the $55 million over 25 years. And we know Canada, regrettably, has a very cold climate for a great portion of the year. And I can speak to this because I have investigated it. The city of Kingston recently canceled their electrified buses because it took 2 to keep 1 on the road, and it just cost too much money. They're having parts problems and everything else with it. So do I agree with some of the things in here? Absolutely. Let's see if we can get money from other levels of government. Absolutely. Am I going to commit the taxpayer to another 2% a year on top of what we don't know? And I think I'll let Mr. Freeman pipe in here, please.
Mr. Chairman, if I just want to direct council to a couple of phrases in there's at least 2 of the recommendations, and I hear what the councillor is saying, and I just wondered if this would be helpful. Included in recommendation C is the phrase right at the end, subject to future budget approvals. So it puts the approval process directly in council's purview where it should be. And then again, in, I believe, recommendation E, that subject to future budget approvals, and then it goes on. So in a couple of places here, in a couple of key places, it puts the budget process in the mix, and it allows council to weigh in with the climate priorities along with all the other priorities that you're grappling with. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Freeman, I thank you for that. I think what the citizens are looking for tonight is to know what council is going to do. Not tonight, because that's what's in front of us. So again, I've asked for these to be recorded separately, which is fine. And I've asked that H go in there. And I think that that's what the taxpayers are entitled to understand is what we're going to do.
Thank you, Councillor Hickey. So we will separate these out. So just speaking to the amendment right now, H, that the city's annual budgets from 2026 to 2031 include $4 million each year for this project, Climate Change Action Plan 2.0. So if we can just speak to H, that amendment right now, Councillor Lachika and Burke. Councillor Lachika.
Thank you very much, Chair Beamer. Through you, I'm just appreciating what Commissioner Freeman has shared about subject to annual budget approval. I think that's a really important piece. So I would not be in favor of the H, would be in favor of the whole plan because it is a holistic thing. And as I mentioned earlier, I just want the citizenry to understand that as a member of a national climate caucus, I was meeting virtually with Valérie Plante, who's the mayor of Montreal, and former mayor of Toronto, David Miller. And there is a galvanization of municipal leadership in Ontario, in Canada, where we are working towards a clean national electrical energy grid. So a clean electricity grid. Then we wouldn't need to have generators and fossil fuel and gas to help us out if there's a power outage. We're working on solar, as you heard, sustainable homes. We passed something tonight on that. Retrofitting our buildings will reduce our emissions. A national high-speed rail system. Municipal leadership across this country is working towards that because that will make such a difference in our national emissions. And funding, as municipalities across the country, a national resilience and recovery strategy. So we're not doing this in isolation as a city. This is something that we're galvanizing together, elbows up, for climate action as a country. And I think it's good for us to keep in step with the endeavors that leaders across municipalities in Canada are engaging in right this minute. So just encouraging that mindset as we vote together. I encourage you to vote for the whole Climate Action Plan 2.0.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lachika. Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Burke and Parnell. Councillor Burke.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Beamer. I'm not going to support the amendment. I think that it's a blind ask for us to step into an elevator to reach the top, when what we're being presented with is a series of steps to get there, and a way for us as council to have oversight along the process of taking this report through step by step. And I think it's a preemptive jump for us, especially given the conversations we have each year around budget, to go ahead and sort of solidify this or not solidify this tonight. I think that the report, under the section budget and financial implications, the staff report backed by the consultant, makes it very clear that at present today, that there are no budgetary or financial implications associated here. This is policy, and I think that it makes better sense for us to implement this policy, and then make our decisions step by step as we try to reach the target. And we're not trying to reach this alone. We're trying to reach this with every other municipality in the province. And so I prefer the route that was presented to us by staff, as opposed to this sort of this recommendation H. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burke. To the amendment, Councillor Parnell.
Thank you. It is to the amendment, but I need to understand these numbers because I can't reconcile it. I hear Darren saying that, and it is on page 5 of our report, but Darren said $2 billion. This plan is $2 billion between now and 2050. And then we also saw the slide that said that we would save $232 million if we spend this $2 billion. But on page 5, the chart says 2.2 billion spent, and we will save 3.17 billion, but that's not 232 million. So where's that difference? Can somebody answer that question? Because otherwise 4 million a year is not going to do it. It's 80 million a year to come up with 2 billion.
Yeah, through the chair, I can provide some light on that. So the big numbers, the investments of 2 billion, those are community costs. So those are not costs borne by the corporation of the city of Peterborough. Those are investment costs needed by the whole community, including the city. So those are things as mentioned, you know, purchasing electric cars and renovating your homes and things like that. The 20 million, 20.5 million that's been referenced, that is the short-term investment that the corporation would need to make to be an enabler, creating those opportunities. So finishing those plans, you know, installing solar, you know, updating our home energy efficiency program, creating, you know, green development guidelines, things like that. That's where that money goes. So that's the corporate cost to get us to those community savings. So they are not the corporation's savings, they are, you know, savings as a whole within the entire community.
Thank you for that, but is it still correct that even as a community, we have to spend 80 million a year or 2 billion-ish over the next 25 years to save 232 million? Or is that was what was on the chart?
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, those are the numbers that were provided to us by our consultant. I don't know if James, if you want to add anything to that.
Through the chair, I believe the difference in the discrepancy in the presentation, we pivoted in the past 2 weeks to provide an updated figure with the retraction of the carbon tax that's been removed. The difference cited is the savings with the tax not involved in this corporation's or the city's net savings. The report submitted was submitted before that action had been made by the federal government. So we did want to provide some context, knowing that this question would come up, why there is a difference in the numbers, and it's due to the removal of the carbon tax from the submitted report.
So thank you for that, but is that really worth $3 billion if they change the carbon tax? Ish? The difference between 3.17 billion versus 232 million? Is that all the difference if there's a carbon tax continuing or canceled? Plus the rebate, all that good stuff? Easy math question.
So through the chair, I think Councillor Purnell, what the display showed was it was a savings of approximately 230 million. If the investment of what you said, the little over $2 billion is in order to get to the net zero by 2050. The change originally with the carbon tax still in place, the table within the report illustrated approximately a $950 million savings. But because of the removal of the carbon tax, that 950 million in savings reduced to approximately 230 millions in savings. So there was a discrepancy and a variance, and that's what Mr. Brian Burns was speaking to. Hopefully does that answer the question or no?
I still don't see how the math is working. On page 5, it's $2.22 billion investment. And we were projecting before 3.17 in savings, but that doesn't equate to the carbon tax. So I'm having trouble believing that number. The 2 billion over 25 years to save only 232 million is that's significant. That's 80 billion or $80 million a year to invest to save 232 million.
Through the chair, that's basically what the numbers are showing at this time, yes.
Yep. No, makes no sense. Thank you, Councillor Purnell. Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Councillor Duguay on the amendment and Councillor Burke for a second time. Councillor Duguay.
Thank you, Chair Beamer. I'm wondering if I might ask the Councillor Hakey, insofar as his motion, I understand it's 2026 to 2031, but perhaps we could clarify, Mr. Hakey, it was the short-term the short-term plan as specified in the report. Because that's that is, if I'm not mistaken, that is a $20 million proposed expenditure. I think it's important we clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Burke for a second time.
Thanks, Chair Beamer, and sorry to eat up the time, but my interpretation of the consultant's graph that we're talking about was that it was very optimistic in the sense that on one side, it looked at how much we had to spend given this plan, but then the optimistic side, or the positive part about it, was that the savings would be maybe incrementally more, but it would be more, the savings realized would be more than the actual spend. That's the graph that I remember. The top was blue and the bottom was yellow, or vice versa. So I don't know where, I don't know if we're merging all these numbers, but that's the way that I remember from the presentation, how it was presented to us, that it said this is how much you have to put out, but the yellow thing going down was longer, and the savings realized would sort of counteract what we spent. So that's what I remember.
Thank you. All right, any further comments or questions on the amendment? Moved by Councillor Hakey, we'll take a vote. Yeah, we'll take the amendment first. And that is lost. All right, so we'll move to the main motions, A to G, moved by Councillor Chika, and we've asked for a separated vote, so we'll vote on each one separately. Starting with A. Councillor Duguay and Councillor and that is carried. Thank you. We'll take a vote on B. And that is carried. Item C. Look at this. And that is carried. D. That is carried. E. That is carried. F. That is carried. And G. And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. So up to our committee reports, 14 B, appointments to advisory committees. Councillor Reel. Councillor Reel. 14B, appointments to advisory committees.
Well, I will move the report, but I was given assurances that, not pointing any fingers at anybody, that we would be getting a kind of a brief bio on each of the candidates. I did not see the bios that I asked for. I didn't think that I had to make a motion for that to happen, but I was given assurance that was going to happen.
Okay, so perhaps Councillor Reel, are you comfortable? It'll be quick in other business, making a real quick motion. So I'll come right back to you in a second. Okay, so moved by Councillor Reel. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Purnell?
Thank you. These are personnel matters. Why do these reports not come to us ideally with the bios in closed session first? We used to, my first term of council, these would come to closed session first.
All right. Councillor, Mr. Clerk, your thoughts on that comment?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There was a process in previous terms where that did occur. You're correct. Staff are currently following the direction that was provided through their fall report of October 28th, whereby there is a working group selection committee that has been approved by council. And those members, which include members of council and staff, do make recommendations and they come forward to council. It's certainly within council's purview if they wish to change that process and reconsider that matter. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, thanks, Councillor Purnell. Any further comments or questions? Moved by Councillor Reel, we'll take a vote. And that is carried. We have no notice of motion. Other business, Councillor Reel?
Appointments to committees come to us that a brief bio of each of the candidates so that we can review them. I'm not saying that the committee hasn't done their work, but I would just like to read the bio. It's kind of a blind vote. As far as I don't know some of these people, I would just like a brief bio on them so I could read up on them. So,
Yep, sounds good. And we'll always be cognizant of personal information, but just sort of a brief bio so that, yeah, when appointment reports come forward, it includes a brief bio of the applicants. And perhaps, Councillor Reel, it's possible that could be enclosed, so maybe we'll just leave it with staff to investigate whether the best practice is having that come forward and open or closed, which used to be the case, and then open. So perhaps Mr. Clerk will leave that with you. And if you feel it needs to be enclosed first, you can report back and we could change our procedural bylaws. And we need 2/3. Yeah, so the recommendations for appointments of members for communities contain a brief biography, and staff will discuss whether that needs to be an open or a closed. Okay, moved by Councillor Reel. We'll take a vote. And we'll need 2/3. And that is carried. Motion, any other business? Motion to adjourn, Councillor Crowley. We'll take a vote. And everybody, council's going to recess for 20 minutes, and then we will reconvene for the start of council at 6:20, 6:30-ish. And we're in adjournment. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, staff. We'll reconvene at 6:20 to 6:30.